Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Explore, Explain. This is a special two-part episode, recorded as a live webinar with guest panelists and attendees taking part as well. And it was a long episode, and we split this into two parts. The first part you're going to listen to or watch now, which is episode 7. And then the second part, which will be episode 8, and you can watch that in due course. But thank you for tuning in. More details are about to follow. Right, I think we'll make a start. So welcome to the webinar and welcome to another episode or double episode, special episode of Explore, Explain. My name's Andy Kirk and it's a great pleasure to welcome a superstar panel of brilliant minds and talents today, but also a wonderful bunch of people attending. So thank you so much for choosing to join us for this live webinar. If you're amongst the audience, if you're watching this back or listening back to this episode, thank you also for tuning in. So this is a special episode. It's a little bit of an ambitious departure from my normal conventional episodes, which are just one person conversations. But what we're going to do today is explore and explain the state of Data Viz. So every now and again, I think it's important to take stock of where we are as a field, as a practice, as a community. Are we in good health? Are we in the right direction? Are we doing things well? Are we doing things not so well? What things are staying the same? Because a key theme I think that's important today is stability, and things that aren't changing is sometimes fine. So, as I said, we've got a stellar lineup of guests. To begin with, let me introduce my co-host, Obinna. Obinna, just say a few words, who you are, where are you in the world?
Hi, everyone, and happy Wednesday. I always have to say that. I am from the wonderful Dartford in Kent. Love it. But yeah, I'm actually a student at UAL doing a design for data visualization masters, and I'm supporting Andy for this wonderful Explore Explain conversation. I will be in the chat, everyone. So if you see random comments there, that is me. Sorry, but also not sorry. So as we engage, feel free to talk there. There's also a Q&A feature as well. If you have a burning question that you want to ask the panelists, click the Q&A button there and you can ask that question and we'll get your question over. Super excited for this conversation and I'll hand over the mic back to you, Andy.
Thank you very much. Excellent stuff. And thank you for your help in advance, Sabina. So let's go around the room. We've got, as I said, we've got a wonderful panel and I'm so thankful for each of these people to say yes to the invite to take part because they do represent the full repertoire of hats and capabilities and experiences. And I don't think they'll mind me saying that they've all been around for a number of years in Data Viz, so they've got a good lens for this stuff. So we'll start off. Evelina, hello to you. Bonjour, good morning.
Hi, Andy. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm Evelina, based in Paris, France. You may still know me by my old Lithuanian name. I got married recently, so now I have a proper French name. And I have a small data storytelling studio called Parabole. So we do visualization, storytelling, both interactive and static. You know the way it works.
Super. Thank you, Evelina. To Rasagy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rasagy. I'm based out of Bangalore in India. I work at Capital One, where we have a DataLabs based out of India. And I'm a design manager here. I'm leading a small set of designers. And I mostly have an experience in B2B design world, so working for other industries and businesses. And I work pretty much at the intersection of UX design and data visualization. And whenever I get some free time, I like to teach. I like to make some data art, which I wish I did more of. And I also sketchnote.
You do a lot of stuff for Rasagy. You know, I'm so happy for you to be here today. So thank you very much, sir. To Joe, a fellow UK person.
Hello. Yes, I'm in Southeast London. I studied graphic design at St Martin's, graduated in 1997. So yeah, certainly I've been around a long time, Andy. Thanks for having me on as well. I've been partner of a design studio called Applied Works since 2005. So we've got a quite big birthday coming up in February. I'm also, I teach on the BA Graphic Design degree at Kingston University. And I'm currently in a second year of an MSc in Geographic Data Science at Birkbeck. So
Wonderful.
also doing quite a lot of things at the moment.
Absolutely, very busy man. Yeah. And yeah, happy anniversary next year for Applied
Thank
Works. Excellent stuff. To Juuso, good morning, sir.
Good morning. I'm Juuso from Helsinki, Finland. I'm a founder of a small design studio called Koponen+Hildén with my creative partner, Hildén. We just turned 10 years, the studio.
Very good.
So anniversary for us as well. We mostly work with Finnish clients, public sector to a large part, some companies as well. We have also written a book called the Data Visualization Handbook that is hopefully getting a new edition next year. Let's see
very good.
if we get there. And I also teach data visualization at Finnish universities and also do a bit of data journalism freelancing on the side.
On the side. There is no side. You've used all the sides there, Juuso. Lisa, last but not least, Lisa.
Sure. Yes, my name is Lisa. I'm in Berlin, Germany. I work for a Data Viz tool called Datawrapper. I'm leading the communications team there. So you might know me from a blog post or two about do's and don'ts in data visualization, especially do's and don'ts when applying color in data visualization. That has been kind of my focus in the past few years. And yeah, before joining Datawrapper in 2017, I created data visualizations for a few newsrooms. And before that, I also studied graphic design like Joe.
Wonderful. As you can see, people, we've got a broad array of experiences and capabilities here. So it's wonderful to have everyone taking part today. So to begin with, let's just sort of just outline the plan for the next hour and a half. The aim today is to go through 6 distinct topics, looking at matters around the creations, the things that we are creating as a society, as a community, the professions that exist, the opportunities for progressing professionally in this career, the people who are involved, the community, who are we all, and also who's missing, who's not represented. And then in a sort of second part of topics, looking more perhaps at the resources that exist. So academia, how is research taking forward the new developments, the understanding of this subject, the tools and the tech that we have access to make the things that we're trying to make. And then just general resources. Where do you get your fix? Where do you get your stuff that keeps you going in terms of being informed about the latest Data Viz works, the Data Viz discourse that's out there? So that's the intention across the next hour and a half. The first 3 topics, for those watching or listening to the episode that this turns out to be, will be episode 7, and then we'll turn the other 3 into episode 8. In terms of audience interaction, as I'm looking at you for the camera, I can see in the bottom right corner the chat saying that the chat is disabled for all the participants. So I need to make sure that I resolve that subtly and elegantly in the background. As in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Obinna just to get the audience a little bit warmed up and to get some responses, just a few warm-up questions to understand who's amongst you, what your kind of current views are about Data Viz and some other things. So let me hand over to Obinna, who's going to share the screen while I resolve this little minor issue in the background.
Sure thing. Hello again, everyone. On your screen, you should see a wonderful slide saying Menti, and at the bottom there, you should see a QR code. If you could please get your phones out and scan that QR code so you can enter the Menti. If the QR code doesn't work for you, you can also go to menti.com that you can see at the top there and type in that code, and you should be able to join. And as you join, please give us a cheeky thumbs up. I'm seeing there. Yeah, I'm seeing a thumbs up coming. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I feel so validated this morning. I appreciate you all so much. Keep coming in. And as enough people come in, I'll then go ahead and switch to the questions. Awesome. Yes, crowd interaction. I love the colors that come up here. It's like the rainbow right here, the rainbow of Data Viz in thumbs up. So thank you all. Awesome. As people continue to join, I'll just go ahead and click on to the first question. As I said, and as you go on, if you go to menti.com and type in that code, you can also join because the QR code is about to disappear momentarily. Awesome. Okay, that's a good number. Let's go. So as Andy said, this is the sort of agenda for the day for part A, for part one. And so let's start asking questions to learn a bit more about all of you in the audience. So first question, when were you first exposed to Data Viz? Pre-2010, 2010, 2015, 2016, 2020, 21, 2023, June 2024. Okay, it's like a race here. We're seeing, okay, we got some 2024s there. Love that. Pre-2010s, you guys are the ancestors, the originators. The one could argue it really started in 19 whatever, tough day and all of that, but we're not going to chat about that.
And just let me say that the reason for those kind of groupings is that obviously this year is this year. That's self-explanatory. The 2021, 2023 is post-pandemic. It's maybe people who found some kind of post-pandemic connection to data and to kind of what we're trying to achieve in this field. The 2016 to 2020, I think, is almost the kind of golden era of growth in terms of the influx of new talent and diverse talent that came into the field. The 2010 to 2015 are the old people like myself, and then there's even older people than myself. Believe it or not, there are pre-2010 people. So that's very interesting already. Back to you, Obinna.
Awesome. Nah, love that insight. Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next question, everyone. I see the majority of people are 2010, 2015. I'm also in that camp as well. But I love the spectrum here. Cool. On to the next question. And that is, what are your standout Data Viz organizations? So just type that in. You have 3 potential options. You see some here. You'll see that you cannot include a space, so just put it all together as one word. Andy Kirk is the correct answer, in case you were wondering. But other answers are also nice to have too. Cool. Okay, they're coming. Yes, data visualization. Reuters. Visual Cinnamon. Yes. Kirk. Someone just said Kirk. Okay, yeah.
Very good.
FT. Reuters. Information is beautiful. Yes. Reuters. Okay, Reuters is winning. DataWrapper, DataLabs India, The Economist. I'm loving that. But Reuters seems to be the winner here. That's interesting.
Very good.
Okay, more information is beautiful now. DVS, Data Viz Society.
Nice little shout out for Applied Works there.
Yes, Applied Works.
Thank you.
You are relevant, in case you're wondering, yes. Awesome, loving that. New York Times is also very strong. The D3JS. I'm loving the spectrum here. Our world in data. Observable. Brilliant. Okay. On to the next question now. Thank you everyone for participating here. It's the last question for this part of the conversation. In what capacity do you interact with Data Viz? Are you a business intelligence person, data journalism, you're just a consumer, you're a freelancer, you are a Data Viz position in an organization, or you just don't and you're here just for fun on a Wednesday morning? If so, I respect you very, very much. There you go. Okay, we're seeing a really, really big uplift in business intelligence and freelancers. Oh, they're taking a lead now. 44% of you are freelancers. Oh, never mind.
The freelancers should be working, not attending webinars.
It's part of their, their education spend, to bring down the profits.
Development spend, yeah.
Cool. Some good amount of consumers and journalists here as well. Data Viz positions in an organization. I would love to learn more about what your position is. Is it actually like a Data Viz designer? What does that actually sound like in your organization? Okay, brilliant. But I love this spectrum here. We're seeing the range of people in the crowd. So I think this conversation is relevant to all of you in the audience today. All of those positions, I think, are going to come into conversation as we hand it over to the panelists. So Thank you very much. On this side, Andy, I'll hand it back over to you to proceed with Explore, Explain.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, interesting insights there. There's, those are the sort of themes that we're going to explore now. And I should say, I've not yet worked out the chat enablement. I've been through about 1 million settings pages, so bear with me, folks. You might still be able to hopefully use the Q&A panel if that's a thing. So I'll leave that to just Obinna to check in the background. But let's start off then with the first section, which is kind of normally titled The Practice and the People, which sounds very grand. But the first topic I want to look at is creations and what we are creating as a community. It's the doing of data viz. And obviously trends are always happening. Things come and go in terms of practices, different methods, but where are we right now? What's popular right now? Has that changed? What used to be popular and is no longer being seen? So there's a very broad discussion point here. And I think I'll start off actually with Joe for this, because Joe's, and there are others on the group, of course, that are making these things. But as a studio, you're probably very sensitive to the kind of trends that are being asked of you, the things that you are being asked to make. And what's your current sense of the practice and how it's evolved perhaps in the last 5, 10, in your case, perhaps 20 years?
Sure. I think my experience is possibly not indicative of the industry. I don't know if what I'm experiencing is true of everybody, but it's probably worth pointing out that we didn't start life as a data viz studio.
Right.
We were a graphic design studio for 5 years, trying to figure out what we were good at, where our discipline, where our specialty could lie. And it really changed with a project we did for the Times in 2010. That was the first project we did that had really any sort of data element to it. And I think it was quite serendipitous in that we had the right skills, and it was good timing. Initially it was a technical need, so it was Flash. So the iPad was being released in 2010. They were the first UK newspaper to launch an app. None of their data viz worked from the website. So we'd always built things in JavaScript and created things that look quite Flash-like in their application, but wouldn't work on the iPad. But if I look back at those projects, like from a data point of view, they were very slim. They were kind of the wall of debt that we did for the emergency budget was 15 data points, like really, really modest amounts of data. And I think the trend I've seen the last 10 to 15 years is much, much bigger projects. So a project we did for Chatham House called resourcetrade.earth, something like 40 million data points. So if you compare the size of those two projects, and I think that took a year, whereas the Times work was maybe 3 weeks, like really rapid turnaround. And it's changed from we were more of a supplier partner, gone from a supplier relationship to more of a partner relationship, where the projects we've been working on tend to unlock further funding. So we've moved more now to work with research agencies, NGOs, who we might do a modest project initially, and then that would lead to further releases. And that's the trend I've seen, I think, is just from small working in data journalism through to more, I suppose, also less linear user journeys as well, more exploratory sort of data platforms with many, many different paths through them.
That's interesting, that, and not least what you said about the kind of origin story there, that you may have commenced as more graphic design, quote unquote, but then you sort of found the specialism. And I think that's probably a case for a lot of people, maybe even in the audience today, that you've possibly started off life as graphic design, and then you've found that data is material that you can work with, and then you start to sort of specialize in that. And I think it's probably the origin story for quite a lot of people on the call today. Evelina, I'll come to you as well. The studio stuff that you work on. What are you making? Because I know that you the outputs of your work are, for example, very broad in their chart types. If we just look at that from that perspective, which seems to me to reflect that there is both an appetite from your clients and therefore, by extension, from the potential users of the work that you're making for quite inventive stuff, quite beyond the bar chart type stuff. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, sorry, I think my mic. Can you hear me okay? Sorry, my
yes,
mic's
all good.
decided to misbehave right when you were asking the question. I think it's quite similar to what Joe was saying, and we were doing a lot of projects last month, and the portfolio is not up to date. I think everyone here can relate, but the trend is quite similar, especially this year. So in 2024, we have bigger and bigger projects and more web projects. So it used to be, especially when I started out on my own, to be maybe like smaller visualizations, kind of a static one, because people were still, checking it out. And now we get more and more things where clients are kind of open to whatever would come out of it. So they say, okay, this is the initial idea we had, but interactively, what would it look like? And recently we had some projects that are maybe not exciting if you put it on a portfolio or on social media and say, hey, we worked on this, but that are actually kind of revolutionary for the client. So I'll give you an example without giving names because it's a bit confidential. So we work with a big cinema company based here in France, and with their finance team, where they need to, and especially their CEO, they need to look at analytics as in, so the budget, the finance, what happened, this client, this sort of partner, this movie, how did it go? And they used to just have a big old Excel sheet that they filter out, sometimes even print out to look at stuff. And what we did is it created an app where you can come into a web app where you can come in and just look at all of the numbers. It was quite simple, I think, for everyone here listening and especially people in the room. But for them, it was like a revolution just because they no longer need to go to Excel, but you just open a site and can filter out and have all of the information. So I think the fact that people are kind of getting used to it, or at least have an idea that it could exist, is the trend that I see. I think we still need to kind of tell them, because the first time they called us, they said, oh, we need a Power BI dashboard, and I said, no, we don't. So we made something else. So the pedagogy side of it is still needs to be there, but I think the trend is like bigger and better. So what can we do with Data Viz to make life more fun, more interesting for everyone?
And I think that's really interesting, because it seems to me that it's also reflective of a slightly more maturing marketplace out there in terms of knowing what to ask for, what to look for, who to look for, what to even type into Google as a search term. Because I don't think we still have a very obvious presence as a profession for people out there. If you're looking for an architect, you type in an architect. Likewise with a graphic designer. But I think there's a certain disconnect in the language of how people find us. And also, as you expressed there, Evelina, almost like the imagination that exists amongst those clients to know, oh, you can do something more than a spreadsheet. Wow, okay, tell us. So as that grows, hopefully there's more opportunities. I'll come to you, Juuso, next, just in terms of the same kind of question. Again, you've got many hats, many different positions of participation in this field, but what do you think kind of reflects the kind of main, are the changes that you've seen, or the things that are kind of prominent right now as a practice?
Well, our perspective might be slightly different because we mostly work locally here in Finland and very heavily, we are very heavily geared towards the public sector, government, and so forth. But within that space, increased sophistication of clients, people have a better understanding what data visualization is, have more ideas themselves, what could work and what possibly doesn't work. Still, of course, respecting the sort of craftsmanship, if you will, of designers. And one sort of group of clients that we have recently had that we didn't previously have is individual research groups at universities. So clearly, people at universities have realized that because getting funding is something where there's a very, very heavy competition, and it pays to sort of make your grant applications clear and insightful and maybe even good looking. And also that extends even to papers published by those research groups. So that's something that, although visualization has of course been a big part in academia for forever, more or less, that people from within the academia start to work with external designers in producing those visualizations is something that, to us at least, is relatively new.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And again, I think there's, there are different experiences out there when you're working with, public sector, governmental sector versus more commercial clients. But I still think that the the spread of those that know what they're asking for and others that don't is not bound to any one of those industries or domains. And so I'm just going to jump to Rasagy just in terms of, I mean, again, you've got multiple perspectives on this, Rasagy, but you are within an organization which has, grown its data viz capability. There's been plenty of data viz stars who've kind of jumped over to your organization. I'm just wondering, how do you find it internally? What are the practices that are being well received? Are you struggling to express yourself creatively because everyone wants bar charts and pie charts, or are you starting to change, move the dial a little bit in terms of the advancement of that stuff?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I feel over the last 15 years, I've seen a shift from, there was this rise of data analytics in India, and I saw a lot of people looking for that when they were Googling, like you mentioned, to people then moving towards dashboard. And I sense that over the last decade, there's been a love-hate relationship that I saw with dashboards, where a lot of people thought they wanted dashboards because they didn't know what else they could look for.
Yeah.
But the abundance of the fatigue of just poorly created dashboards shifted things a lot. And I see that in organizations like the one that I'm at, and even some of the previous ones where I worked, where we moved from analyst teams just doing analysis and making presentations, summarizing it, to dashboards that get updated more dynamically. And so somebody can just look at the dashboard, to now thinking about it as a product. And I sense the last is the phase where we are at, at Capital One and DataLabs. And also I see a lot of other similar organizations in the ecosystem in India, where they're not just thinking of a dashboard which sits in a part of a workflow, but really thinking of a product where data visualization is helping you do something end to end. Right? And I think it's a good step forward because now it isn't a small piece of the bigger journey or puzzle that we are contributing to, but we're really thinking through every aspect of it. And that means even understanding where is data being collected and how is it being analyzed before we start visualizing it becomes part of our area. And I do sense that some of the newer frontiers that we saw, storytelling became a big sort of hype cycle,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah.
There was some work on like dynamically making stories or annotations that could be worked, because in most of our domain, we don't have a static set of data that we then analyze. So how do you make sure that the stories continue to be like stories as data updates every week, every month, every quarter? And now I think there is a bit of a resistance with the machine learning AI sort of world. And I'm sorry, I'm the first one to bring up AI in a panel,
All
but
good.
this seems to be now a new area where people are like, why do I need to look at charts if I could just use Gen AI to get an answer to a question?
Interesting.
And I think that's the friction where we are now trying to make or show value of why visualizations are still valuable, why the ability to see data and see patterns is still going to be better than just relying on an AI to ask a specific question and get a specific answer. So those are, I think, newer themes that we're working on. So I do feel that the battle is no longer bar chart versus Cox-Comb chart, but I think there are like newer battles that we are now playing around.
That's interesting. Yes, we will pick up mention to AI in the later section, because I think it's inevitable. It's here. We have to embrace it, and there are some things that I think are terrible about it and things that are positive. So we'll talk about those and how they can coexist, I think, with data viz rather than battle against. But that's really interesting. Before I come to Lisa, because I know I'm going to probe Lisa with respect to the radar you have, Lisa, for the latest works that are out there, especially. But before I come to yourself, I'm just going to ask the audience to have a little think in the background. What works can you think of that represent the field as it is now, the field at its best, perhaps? What examples, what example projects can come to mind, whether it's a link that you can drop into the chat box or just the title or even a description of the thing? I do think what Rasagy mentioned there about storytelling is interesting, because I think dashboards and storytelling are the main words that I encounter with clients. I want one of these two things, and usually they also want the opposite. And it's almost like it's bypassing data viz as the terminology. But I think storytelling, I often think back to, I think it was around 2015, 2016, there was a major talk given by Archie Tay from New York Times about the sort of decision or the tactic by the New York Times to do fewer interactives. And what they were saying wasn't that they were stopping interactivity. They were being just a bit more discerning about what interactivity they were asking of the audience to do. And, if you think that the world that they exist in is largely mobile first, you don't want to have fiddly interactions on small screens. And I think that did set a trend of what we now see as sort of storytelling, and probably scrolly telling, especially as a particular method for that. But Lisa, from your perspective, I'm specifically thinking about the weekly dispatch that you. I know it's not just yourself who runs these, but you've been kind of close to this commitment, and I know it's a lot of work for you. It's a big undertaking, but in a nutshell, in a couple of minutes, what do you think is the sort of summary position of where we are now in terms of what we're creating, maybe what we're not creating as much?
Yeah, sure. It's super interesting that Evelina and Joe mentioned actually that people are looking for bigger projects, because that's not what I'm seeing in the news world. That's not what's coming out much there. I feel like 10 years ago, when the talk was given, we were still on that phase of data Viz teams being formed. Everybody, like everything is exciting and new, and we try out amazing stuff and see what's possible with the technology. And then, yeah, the restrictions hit, like mobile first, because more than 50% of the people are reading the news on mobile, and you have like something like dark mode, you have new accessibility concerns, and all that leads to people trying to figure out like the basics and how to make simple charts that actually meet all these requirements that are given from the organizations or from the newsrooms. And so that's what I'm seeing now. I'm seeing a lot of extremely well done simple charts, like bar charts, etc., line charts, the simple stuff. And I see more of that than ever before, but I see less and less bigger projects. And I think, that's a little bit of a pity, I think. But I also see, more and more data Viz teams actually are working on amazing stuff, like not just the US anymore. It's not just the New York Times anymore. It's not just the Washington Post. It's lots of European newsrooms. It's starting more and more to get to the Asian newsrooms too, which is exciting. So that's great. But I also see on the other side that the standards just shifted, and like the data Viz literacy also. So people learned how to read a Sankey diagram. Like you see more of that. It's not a, wow, this is new, I have no idea what's going on here. When you see a Voronoi tree map, or like a Sankey, or like even a scatter plot.
Yeah.
I feel like this is used more and more, but it doesn't have this wow effect anymore. And the same is true with storytelling. Like you don't hit a storytelling anymore, and then you're like, wow, this is super exciting. You're like, oh, okay, I've seen that dozens of times by now. So maybe it's also that. Maybe it's also the big projects are still big, but they're not super exciting anymore because people have seen it so much. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it's something I've recognized as well, that there's perhaps, and we always have to be careful about the things that we're not seeing. Doesn't necessarily mean they don't exist. It's just they're not landing publicly in the same place. So I do think that we are seeing fewer big ticket marquee projects that might have been around a lot more 5-10 years ago, but maybe they were in some respects quite indulgent projects from clients who want something for the lobby, or something for the website homepage to sort of show their kind of halo effect of how we cool and kind of progressive in our thinking of digital. But they still may exist, but perhaps we don't see them publicly as much. I do think, we're going to talk shortly about professions, but I do think there are fewer studios around than there were 5-10 years ago. Some of them have been absorbed and taken over. So maybe, again, there's just perhaps less public work that we're seeing. I also think you're right to mention the techniques that are prevalent, which is a positive sign. That there was many instances in the past where you'd hear about, anecdotally, a reluctance to use things like scatter plots in a newspaper, or unusual chart types, because there wouldn't be a confidence that the audience would know how to read them. But I do think things like the election cycle, and let's just pick the US election especially, it sometimes sort of brute forces into the public arena these methods that are different, cartograms, as you mentioned, Sankey diagrams, prism maps, all these things that are, quite ornate and unusual, but they've been shown to be useful. I mean, the jury's probably still out on the gauge chart and the needle, that's still terrifying in many respects. But I do think the spread of methods is in a healthy position, both from the creating and the receiving and reading side. And that's why I also think that milestone of the pandemic was important, because it did put into the public consciousness log scales and all sorts of charts from the UK point of view on BBC News at 5 p.m. to a mass audience. And it was shown that these things can take hold and make sense. So we've had a few mentions in the chat box about methods, and a couple of people mentioned there the pudding, which is a great site of I don't know how you can summarize it in a single line, but it's kind of pop culture type curiosity explorations, and they do all sorts of wonderful stuff. And they have very much popularized storytelling, but still inventive ways each time that they produce stuff. So that's a good example of a place to find and seek out new inspiration. But many of those publications, studios, whatever it is that Obinna's sort of word cloud revealed, they're all places to check out as well. So,
Andy, do you mind if I ask everyone
please.
a kind of a follow-up question? I wonder if, based on everything we said, I wonder if there's a bit of a disconnect, and this is a question for, I think, the panelists, but also possibly the audience, because we, for instance, you, Lisa, you look a lot at the newsrooms, and I wonder if we are biased in a sense that when we say, oh, people get used to a Sankey or a connected dot plot, when I teach, so we also work with public policy clients and corporates, and when I teach in a corporate environment and I show them a Sankey or a connected dot plot, they look at me like, what is that? And I always say that, oh, I'm hoping in the next years we'll get more popular. So I think my question to everyone is, do you think it's really the general population, or maybe just those who are really, really kind of in the data viz world and are used to it? Because I'm not sure that everyone is up to speed. I think it's one of your topics for later, Andy, but sometimes I do sections also on best practices. And last time I showed a bunch of students an Excel 3D pie chart and no one could tell me what was wrong with it. So in my head, I was thinking, okay, there's still some work to be done.
I'll come to Juuso on this one. You had a strong nod.
Yeah, I definitely agree that we are maybe a bit too optimistic about the wider audience's ability to sort of get this thing internalized. I mean, the log scales example relating to the pandemic. At the time, I thought this is the sort of the moment for log scales. Now people are starting to learn to read them, but then afterwards, like when it has sort of subsided, now when I'm doing trainings, people still have the same problems reading log scales that they used to. Of course, this is really context dependent. Like, who is the audience? Are we creating, for example, dashboards or other visualizations that works for tools for people who work them daily? And that's, of course, very different. They can be expected to learn the visualization and ins and outs of it, or are we doing for the casual reader? And then, of course, the reader of what? The reader of The Economist or The Sun? I mean, it's a very different audience.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's, I mean, Evelina's question's perfect, because you're absolutely right. We can be ignorant to our own exposure and familiarity with these methods and think, well, if we can get them, surely everyone else makes sense of them. And it isn't the case. But I do think, I am hopeful that anyone is capable of embracing and engaging with any visualization. We've also got to step up and help them. And I think back to Juuso's point about log scales, the thing that made me hopeful about that was perhaps through the work of John Byrne-Murdoch, where he was putting out these log scale charts every night, but bringing commentary and telling us how to make sense of these. What to track? What does a shape mean? Is it good or bad? And so that extra assistance, which we sometimes neglect to give, can make any chart possible for any audience, but it needs that intervening kind of communication skill. Before I move on to just the next section, Lisa, Joe, Rasagy, you got any other comments in response to Evelina's point there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I think that's one of the reasons why we see more and more like these super simple charts, like bar charts, line charts, everyone understands. And that's also a reason, I think, why like personally, I see better explained charts, which makes me super happy. That, yeah, as Andy mentioned, the work by John Murdoch was really like, he was a pioneer, it seems like in this case, like the titles that had a clear statement, all the annotations. This thing is important, and I think Newsroom figured it out. Like, more simple charts, better explained, leads to more people understanding it, and that's important. But I'm also like, I'm always celebrating these like general audience newsrooms, like Bloomberg, for example. Okay, Bloomberg is a little bit more business focused, but they use like Sankey diagrams, they use like B-swarm plots, etc., and they push this data viz literacy this way. And I think this is super important because sometimes these chart types are just the better choice.
Yeah, I mean, Bloomberg is kind of off the scale in its inventiveness at the moment. I mean, they've got a huge army of people, so they've got the chance to do that. But yeah, some of their work is really kind of pushing the edges. Wonderful stuff, people. We're going to move on to the next section, which is about professions. And I think this is something we've touched on already in that survey. So when I got into the Data Viz around 2007, there might have been about 20 people maybe in the field, I don't know. But it didn't feel to me unlikely that by now in the future, we'd have lots of people with Data Viz person as their job title. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, but it's also the case that thankfully, I guess for people like myself doing training courses, there's a lot of people out there who are expected to have data viz skills alongside their job, their duties, their roles. But what do we think is the current state of the sort of professionalization of data viz as a career, as a way to make a living? Let me come to Rasagy, because you've got again lots of different experiences and roles that help you make a living. So, as a educator, as somebody doing the job for an organization, as an employee, but then also the side things you do, what's your kind of current thinking about the prospects? I'm thinking especially just about, some of the students you work with, how are you hopeful for them to be able to forge a career in data viz?
Yeah, that's super interesting because like flashback to 15 years back when I did a master's in information design, I thought I'll get super specialized into this and this is the role that I look for. And even today, I don't see information design roles show up or like a database designer role show up in the industry, like at least in the Indian ecosystem that I can talk about. What I do notice is a lot of value given to an understanding of database in other roles. So I definitely see the information design or graphic design world where they're doing a lot of print report related stuff, where understanding how to represent data is becoming more and more valuable. And now we have newer studios showing up in India, like Gurman's Revisual Lab,
Yeah.
where they are really working on this hardcore data visualization kind of stuff, even though some of them may not call themselves information designer. I'm just sort of very specific on the field, right? But I also see the bigger space of product design or UX design, whatever new term comes in, where they are building a lot of UI UX stuff, but understanding of data, so being like a data literate designer, and then ability to actually understand when to use what in your product design is becoming more powerful. So even though we have a bunch of people studying information design who say I'm teaching as students, barely any of them end up taking up a specialized information designer role. Most of them are taking up a product design role where they end up doing dashboard work or new product work. There is a lot of dynamic data that is being done. So I definitely sense more scope just in terms of magnitude or number of roles in that world compared to the graphic design world. I do see a lot of interest in Indian sort of spaces, and also a lot of studios in India work for clients all around the world for continuing to do like graphic design and information design, interactive sort of pieces as well. I am also slightly more hopeful to see more data journalism show up in India. India has had very few newsrooms that have adopted this practice well, and I think the same bit about data literacy. Like vast part of India still may not understand anything beyond a few simple charts, and so data literacy is still poor enough for people to go do storytelling or novel visualizations there. But I've seen like some interesting examples of images, like the podcast that you've done with Gurman had images as the element that was being visualized, right? And just using a tree sort of map, but putting a lot of images, which is easier to understand. So I still think there is potential for designers who understand data viz to go into more public advocacy spaces, but they'll have to break away from more complex or even the traditional chart types to something more interesting.
So again, it feels like we're coming back to the same point from before, which is almost an identity or labeling matter in the way that perhaps, I don't know, if you go and study social science at university, you don't become a pure social scientist. You apply that to a different sort of role in life. I mean, I'll come to you, Juuso, on this one as well, because you've got a role in educating. Are you hopeful about kind of the career prospects that are out there? Is it the same sort of story as Rasagy mentioned?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mostly teach not people who are studying data visualization as their main subject.
Right.
I do that as well. We have one program in Finland where there's a possibility to do that as the main subject, but mostly these are sort of supplementary courses for people who are becoming journalists or scientists or whatever. And there I find that it tends to help their job prospects that they have these skills because they are so widely applicable to a lot of domains. But for people to specialize in data visualization as as their life career, at least in a small country like ours, there aren't that many opportunities to specialize that in fully. Some of them end up working for me and Jonathan, and we're happy about that, of course. But the wider job market doesn't necessarily fit too many people with very strong focus on information design. But as a general skill that is applicable to a lot of domains, I think data visualization and information design is very, very relevant to a lot of people. And I actually think that basically all knowledge workers should have at least a basic understanding of data visualization. And this is something we aim to help our clients with. We also create not just trainings, but also, for example, concrete tools and visual guidelines that help our clients, experts working in client organizations to create visualizations without the need to resort to the external designer every time they need for a report or a paper some type of visualization.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think you're absolutely right about that need for kind of knowledge workers to have this as part of their skill set. And so jumping just to Lisa, I'm thinking your role, Lisa, with a Datawrapper hat on right now. Obviously you are aware of the user base of Datawrapper and the client organizations. And what's your sense of, I don't know, the kind of jobs and the kind of people that are using this tool, which reflects the fact that these people must be active in Data Viz, even if they don't necessarily have it in their job title?
Interesting. I'm not so much on the sales side, so I
Yeah,
can't
sure.
speak too much about it. I know that it's definitely like we see more NGOs, we see more financial institutions, etc. than we saw like 5 years ago, for sure. I think when it comes to the newsrooms themselves, I mean, they have the big advantage if they have a news site to know how many people view their articles, and like Data Viz articles still perform on average so much better than like a purely text-based article. So they're investing. I know that, like, for example, Site Online just doubled their team like within the last year or two, just because it attracts new viewers, it attracts subscribers. So people are still looking for good data visualization designers. It's in the news world. There's no shortage of that. And I'm so happy to see that this is still, like, you just need to be good to be hired. You just need a good portfolio, which you can build, I don't know, in your free time, etc. There's no certain education you need, which is, I think, something I want to highlight because that makes me super happy that everybody gets.
No, I think that's a great point. I think you're absolutely right that there shouldn't be any blockage or obstacle to people getting into this in terms of any sort of prior foundational knowledge. I think, I'm sure many of you agree, that a natural curiosity is worth gold, and thereafter you've got a good starting point. I'm also mindful, and I just flash across the panelists there. I noticed Anna Lombardi's name in the audience, and hi, Anna. And I'm just thinking about Anna's story, who was a data journalist at the Times and now working in climate. And we talked before about the works that are being created. And obviously, there's nothing more important perhaps in our life than kind of climate related visualizations. And it's been wonderful to see a number of the data viz community take up very prominent roles in organizations linked to the climate change movement. And again, that's almost like a new career that would not possibly have existed 5, 10, 15 years ago. So I guess where I'm going at that is I was thinking about my nieces and nephews and what careers they might move into in 5, 10 years. They may not even exist right now. This is such a fluid space and constantly evolving. I'm just going to go back to Joe as well, because you triggered off this thinking, Joe, about the kind of entry into the subject through graphic design initially as a sort of staging post. What, again, with your many hats, what are you seeing in terms of the professional kind of opportunities that exist in this world? Obviously, you're in a studio, and thankfully that studio is still going very strong. But what's out there for people to get into this?
Yeah, so many things to reflect on. In the last sort of 10 minutes since I last spoke, someone mentioned making data viz a data literacy, making data viz accessible to a broad audience. And I think to do that, you need a breadth of skills, and we have a real breadth of skills in-house, from people who can run workshops to doing strategy to inclusive user-centered design. I think prototyping is a really important part of that process, is actually testing things on people to make sure that it makes sense. We've actually only ever hired one person who's had formal training in data visualization in nearly 20 years. Marco Bernardi joined us 3.5 years ago from Accurat. So he worked under Giorgio Lupi,
yes.
and was trained at Politecnico di Milano.
Yeah.
And he's brought a huge amount of data knowledge and data visualization knowledge to us that's, I think, broadened our output, because in the past, a lot of the data analysis stuff has happened client side, and it's been our job to kind of understand often really complex bits of research. And the researchers are visualizing stuff in Python or Excel even, and to them it makes sense. To us, it's kind of, how do you interpret something that complex and convey it to a broader audience, make it more accessible? And I think that's to do with having a breadth of different skill sets in-house. So yeah, that's my perspective.
I think it's that kind of classic tension of specialist, generalist, and I sometimes think that I've ended up in the sort of generalist. I don't know if I'm very good at any one of these things individually. It's more like I'm aware of all these things that I need to be conversant in, at least. But I'm also thinking then, Evelina, as a studio, again, you've got to fulfill lots of different roles and duties. You've got to be creatively gifted, but also business savvy and a marketeer, and also handling colleagues and sort of suppliers. So, what's been your journey into this field, and how others might be able to sort of draw from that sort of pathway?
So I'm maybe different from a lot of people on the panel. I come from the sort of data analytics world and communication at the same time. And then the design I kind of learned on the way, which is the reason why at this studio, and our studio is much smaller than Joe's, we haven't existed that long, but at our studio, I have more designers who have like a graphic design background that I don't. So I'm more in the sort of information, structure, architecture, storytelling kind of side of things. To go back to some of the previous notes and questions, I don't feel like data viz jobs, like specific jobs, they have increased in number in the past years. I'd be curious to hear how everyone on the panel introduces themselves, because when someone asks me what I do, I would say 10% of people get really excited, especially if I mention like storytelling in there, because it's kind of a trendy thing. But the other 90%, they usually look at me and say, "Did you make it up?" I'm like, no, I promise I have clients who, pay the bills. So as some of you said, it's a skill that everyone kind of needs. And I see it in trainings where I will have people from very different fields. And I think, Andy, you probably have the same, which from a marketing perspective, I worked with other organizations where they would tell me you need to like narrow down to a specific group of people. And I would say, no, for our field, it works, because from the marketing point of view, it's kind of nonsensical to say, oh, I can have a researcher, but I can also have an analyst and a marketing person. But the thing is that organizations, public or private, need the skills, which is maybe the reason why our studios and freelancers exist. And I think there are a lot of freelancers today, but they don't necessarily have the need for a data viz person full-time in-house.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of thing where they would maybe call us a few times a year, which is, really nice. But in-house, I'm not sure you would have enough work for a person who's doing it 100%. Or maybe it's just a question of we're not ready because we're not aware. But that's what I see.
Yeah, no, that's a range, especially the how do you introduce yourself? I don't know. I've tried different versions for 15 years, and
Which one works?
no, none of them. None of
None of
them.
them?
No, no. And the amount of times you say the same, that you meet the same person again, like my barber every 4 weeks. What is it you do? Well, I remember 8 weeks ago when we went through this, and 4 weeks ago when we tried something else. But no, I think it's really interesting, and I'm just aware of some of the questions that have landed. There's a question from Gina. What steps would you take to find data viz clients and roles in the current job climate? And I think it's a useful bridge just to take us on to the last section of this last part of this first chapter, just for a few minutes, which is about it's a difficult field right now. I think anecdotally, I've spoken to a lot of people in the data viz world the last 6-12 months, and it does feel challenging. I'm largely looking at sort of freelancers and studios. It feels like a challenging environment, which I think is reflective. I'm hoping it's reflective less of data viz as a thing that's not relevant and more reflective of the economy and just uncertainty and the idea that perhaps some of this is just seen as maybe luxury spend a little bit at the moment for some organizations. And so finding clients and roles is as challenging as it's ever been. I still think there's probably plenty of roles out there, but as we've talked about in that last section, it might need a little bit of inventiveness about how you position yourself and describe what it is you're good at and able to do, and what you then type in to search for job opportunities. Finding clients is really about just putting yourself out there, putting a portfolio of work out there, as Lisa mentioned, sort of demonstrating what you're capable of doing, whether it's examples of your work, examples of your discourse, of your thinking, of your analysis of data viz, giving yourself a platform, getting part of the community, connecting with people, and just getting a large enough landing area that clients out there, when they're looking around for the different search terms, can find you. But it's hard, and I've been trying to do that for 15 years, and I still try and work out what it is I'm trying to do. So it's a very kind of rough answer, but I think it is a challenging time right now. But I want to quickly move on to the people, the community, who is in our gang in Data Viz. Now, every year, the Data Viz Society runs the survey. I can't remember what it's called now. The survey, to get a sense of the membership of the field, to get a sense of background, similar questions to what Obinna ran before. But I think the question I'll start here, and I'll go back to Evelina to kick off with this one, which is, do we think that we've got a healthy community? The state of the industry. Thank you, Remco. Do we think we've got a healthy community in terms of membership? Are we fully representative? Are we inclusive? Are we diverse? If we're not, what can we do?
So before I go into the detail, I want to say that I think we have the nicest community ever.
Yeah, I agree.
Regardless of, starting with you, Andy, and everyone else in the room and in the audience. I don't know how everyone else feels about it, but I feel like the community in the past couple of years has been kind of lost, maybe for lack of a better word. I feel like we're no longer as present and as united. Maybe it's a question of what role the Data Viz Society plays, the Twitter demise, or just the fact that we're a bit more scattered, or the fact that conferences are maybe no longer as popular, or some have disappeared. There's a thing around that. What I love seeing is people in the field and studios popping up kind of all over the world. Is maybe an exaggeration for now, but hopefully at some point. So we mentioned Gurman's Visual Labs, which is just amazing, but it didn't exist. I think they've been around for for a year, I almost never see things from the African continent. And I remember when I used to run Outlier, we would work really hard to find speakers there, but it would still be quite complicated, especially for the sort of the standard that we were looking for in terms of expertise and public speaking and everything. So I don't think we're representative just yet. But to your point from a previous question, Andy, I don't know if it's a question of those people don't exist or that we're just not aware.
Yeah. And I think the elephant in the room perhaps is the English language dominance, because that immediately creates a blockage, and I'm relentlessly thankful that it is the English language, because I cannot speak another language, and I'm always aware of the extra efforts that people make to be able to share their work and communicate to me, because I can't speak their language. And it is a thing, and it was something that was brought up, I remember, at the Porto Outlier event, as something that I don't think anyone had an easy answer, but something that needs to be constantly pushed. Does there need to be an outlier in the East? Something that's run for people, by people out there, that may not be in English language, and that's absolutely fine. It should be, but you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be, and I don't think it is a case of these things aren't existing. These people are present. These people are involved. It's just there's something that stops us. And I think you're absolutely right to also call out the demise of Twitter as a once place where many of us were very active and felt part of a community, and the fragmentation that's occurred. The slight green shoots, I should say, blue sky, the last few weeks has been very promising. It's been very nostalgic. 2013, 2014 Twitter. There will be some baddies arrive and ruin it, but for now it's a nice place. But I mean, again, Lisa, I think I'll come back to you again, because you talked about, going back to just a narrow part of your work and the weekly dispatch, and the radar that you've got for works that are out there. Are you confident that we're in a good place? We could get better, of course. It could be healthier. We could be more inclusive. Always, that's never an end point that we can reach. But are you hopeful? Are you happy?
It's getting a little bit better, I feel like, over the last 5 years. But I agree with everything Evelina said. Like, we would love to feature more from Africa. Almost impossible. Inky Fada, I think, from Tunisia is something we sometimes feature. Sometimes they bring out interesting stuff. Which, like my coworkers Vivian and Rose, when they put together the State of Data Viz dispatch every week, they're always super excited when they see non-Latin characters on a data visualization. And we see that a little bit more than 3 years ago. Like, for example, the Japanese newsroom Nikkei has some very beautiful data visualizations. SBS News, which is like a Korean visualization, or like Korean newsroom, they put out like a weekly newsletter, I think, with visualizations, and that always keeps us very excited. But we would love to see that more. I would love to get to a state where it's not super
unusual,
fascinating anymore, but like the norm, that it's all like. And when we have more choice, as Evelina said too, like, you're always happy when you get like 1 or 2 newsrooms, 1 or 2 speakers when you organize a conference. But it would be awesome to have like choice between what do you feature, who do you invite, etc.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I would come to you, Juuso, on this as well, because just going back to that kind of English language thing. I'm always mindful when I listen to you and Jonathan online, speaking better English than I do, thinking that that's not your natural language. Your natural language is Finnish, and then there must be an inherent frustration that you can't just be speaking and writing and publishing things in your natural language, because that's going to reach a narrower audience inevitably. But from your perspective in Finland, how do you feel connected? How do you feel part of this field at large?
Well, in case of Jonathan, it's even trickier because he's part of the Swedish-speaking minority, so he's even a minority within Finland. He can't use even his natural native language that much. But yeah, well, English is like the second language in Finland in any case, so everybody at least under the age of 60 or so speaks at least a bit of it, and it is used maybe a bit too much even, I would say. I'm a huge fan of the Finnish language, so we could do with a little less English when we're conversing within the country itself. I don't think we are that detached from the English speaking world because, as mentioned, the language skill is absorbed at such a young age. You know, our kids watch YouTube and speak YouTube English. But and I feel we feel quite connected with the English speaking world. It is pretty natural to us. But the English speaking world, of course, isn't everything. One thing that I'm missing, for example, from the Malofie conference was that there was always a very large contingent of people from South America and the Spanish speaking world and the Portuguese speaking world, which is something that I don't see to the same extent now when I'm following events and seeing people interact online, and that's of course still sort of in the Western world of European languages, and I'm not talking about Asian and African languages and so forth. So definitely, I'm looking forward and seeing more linguistic diversity, and even small languages like Finnish, getting some sort of exposure. But on the other hand, for us to be able to communicate, we need a language that most of us can speak, and English, for better or worse, is that language for most of us.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And Joe, again, with your 20-year perspective of the community, how have you seen the membership evolve? It's definitely grown.
Yeah, I think.
Is it growing in all directions, or what's your take?
Again, I may be in a bit of a London bubble, possibly. The thing I think is most striking is, as a student in the 90s studying graphic design, all the references it's just a sea of white guys with their name above the door, and so many of the leading experts in this field are female, which is it's brilliant, and that's I hope a good indication of how much things have changed in 30 years. I see that on the client side as well, working with an ever more diverse group of, if you're sat in a room with a client, that's definitely improved a lot over the last 15 years, I would say. In terms of the market, I think it's kind of back to an earlier point, but the rise in data visualization around climate science, and we've gone from having quite a broad range of industries to working almost exclusively in that industry. And I think that from an industry point of view is quite healthy. I'm hoping that trend is not just what we're seeing, but we had a terrible COVID, but we've come out of that. And I think the level of data within the climate science world is really encouraging for us. We're hopefully going to have our best year ever this year.
Fantastic.
And as I say, I don't know if that's representative of the industry. And I think there's kind of two streams of conversations that have come up around data literacy and data journalism and how the public are consuming data. And I think there's a general evident raising of the bar of the quality of work when, 15 years ago, an explosion of data viz everywhere and everyone was doing it. And I think that's worth noting. But then what we're doing is it's almost like parallel development of the kinds of work we're doing, and it's often working with data scientists and people client side, and I think from that point of view, the inclusive design process is really important. Being aware of who you're designing for, accessibility improves the experience for everybody as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you're right, with respect to this comment you made about the sort of gender split, and I'm mindful that we've got 4 men and 2 ladies on this call, which is it's actually thankfully not typical of my podcast series. I was looking the other day, actually, dominated by women, and it wasn't by design, it's just dominated by women, because there are some terrific talents, and it just happens to be that at the moment they're dominated by women, which wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago, certainly. But again, coming to Rasagy, and I'm specifically mindful of where you are in the world, Rasagy, and again, that question of how you feel part of this world and the community that you see around you in your region. What's your sort of take on the sort of membership and who's in this gang, as I mentioned at the start?
Yeah, I definitely think the language part is pretty key. India got independence 75 years back, but the colonial influences has still been rooted, which means that English is always also seen as a class divide amongst other people. And what's interesting about India is that apart from English, there are 22 official languages, and then there are like 100 variants of each other language, right? So it's also not a simple solution of saying, let's increase, apart from English, another language data visualization, because suddenly there is so many different languages that people speak in India. I think, at least in data visualization community, we are very English focused, even within the peers that I see in India. I don't see enough data visualization coming in Indian languages, and I am guilty of that. I don't think I've made any data visualization, even in my own mother tongue. What I've been trying to do more recently is in some of my courses, like I teach a schematic cartography course. I've been nudging students to make a map of their own hometown and their lived experiences.
Yeah.
But not just make one in English, but make one in the language that is spoken in that area. And so suddenly now I have at least bilingual content that is being sort of created. And I think that's the first step to democratize or even just evangelize data visualization in a country as diverse as India. And I also hope that that is a step forward towards bringing more stories that matter to the larger public than just the English-speaking public, right? Because you speak English, you write stories that are mattering to people that are also reading English, right? So, and I also think from that, there is an opportunity to even go beyond just language and also think about aesthetics and principles. And I think in India, we're still very focused on the Western aesthetic. All of my training was based on Bauhaus. Another institute I teach at is very based on Ulm as a design sort of pedagogy. And while they've evolved over years, it is still a very similar aesthetic, right? So I would love to see a lot more people coming in with aesthetics that are not so much dovetail-led, but maybe Adobe Seguera or other sort of more, newer approaches to this. And I think that's the piece that I feel as a community we're still lacking.
Yeah, 100%. And a couple of points there. First of all, just another example of a studio doing some brilliant stuff is the Continentalist, led by Pei Ying, and also, and it's not just that they are in Singapore, but they're doing matters around Asia. It's about stories that are relevant to the audiences out there, and they're doing some incredible stuff. Also, I often think back to the work of Georgia Lupi and Steph Posovec with Dear Data as a real moment in time when it popularized access to the subject through pen and paper and analog artisanal solutions, which made it more accessible. You didn't feel, I'm speaking on behalf of all the people affected by it. I don't think people therefore felt that they had to learn a tool or master a tool or code to do data viz. And I think that was so liberating for a lot of people coming in. And I do feel, again, tracing things back to 2015, 16, that there was an influx of new talent that came in through that door that we're now seeing the fruits of in terms of, again, the diversity within the realm of what has been achieved, I do think is a result of that period. So thank you for now, folks.
To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.